The alien council hall was vast and filled with cold light from the crystal walls. Hundreds of alien voices whispered among themselves as the council leader raised his hand for silence. At the center of the room stood Rina, a young officer from their fleet. Her hands were bound in silver restraints that glowed softly, marking her as guilty before the trial had even ended. The council leader's voice rang out across the chamber. Rina of the Fourth Fleet, you stand accused of betrayal against your own people. Evidence shows that secret star maps were passed to enemy raiders, leading to the loss of 2 colonies. The punishment is death. The execution will take place at dawn. The crowd in the gallery shouted approval. For them, this was justice. They wanted someone to blame for the raids, someone to punish for the loss of their homes and families. To most of them, Rina was already guilty. But among the audience sat a group of humans, visitors from Earth who were stationed on the planet as part of an alliance exchange. They were here to learn, to share knowledge, and to observe. Most of them stayed quiet, not wishing to interfere in alien matters. Yet one of them, a medic named Markel, could not take his eyes off the accused officer. Markel was not a soldier or a commander. He was trained to heal, not to fight. His duty was to provide medical aid to anyone in need, whether human or alien. As he looked at Rina, he noticed something that others seemed to ignore. Her face was pale, not from shame, but from fear. Her eyes did not hold the look of a traitor but of someone desperate to be heard. The trial had been short, almost too short. Witnesses were not allowed to speak on her behalf. Documents were displayed on glowing panels, but none were explained clearly. The council only repeated their conclusion: she was guilty. Markel's mind went back to stories from Earth's history. There had been times when people were punished not for crimes, but for standing in the way of powerful leaders. Entire lives were ended because truth was inconvenient. His stomach turned at the thought that maybe this young alien officer was another victim of such injustice. Rina stood silently as the sentence was spoken. She tried to speak, but the council leader struck the staff against the ground, and the chamber filled with echoing sound. Her words were lost. Guards in black armor moved to take her away. As she was led past the gallery, her eyes lifted for just a moment. She did not look at the crowd. She looked at the humans. For a second, her gaze met Markel's. It was not the gaze of someone who had betrayed her people. It was the gaze of someone pleading for understanding. That look stayed with him long after she was gone. The crowd slowly left the chamber, their anger satisfied. The council members returned to their private rooms. Soon the hall was empty, but Markel remained seated, his thoughts heavy. One of the other humans, a young officer named Joran, touched his shoulder. "Come on, Markel. It's over. We should not involve ourselves. Their laws are not ours." Markel nodded slowly, but he did not rise. His heart told him something different. He remembered every patient he had ever treated. Pain, fear, wounds, those were things he understood. When he had looked at Rina, he had not seen guilt. He had seen fear of being silenced. Later that evening, Markel walked through the quiet corridors of the alien city. The crystal walls glowed faintly in the night, giving the streets an unearthly beauty. But for him, the city felt heavy with judgment. He passed alien citizens who spoke of the execution as if it were a celebration. They believed justice was being done. At the medical quarters, Markel prepared supplies for the next day. As part of his duty, he had been assigned to check Rina's health before the execution. It was a cruel task, making sure a prisoner was fit enough to be executed. He hated the idea, but duty was duty. Still, his thoughts returned to her eyes. What if she was innocent? What if the council was hiding the truth? He knew humans were seen as emotional, sometimes reckless. If he spoke out, he might be accused of disrespecting alien law. But if he stayed silent, an innocent life might be lost. Markel placed his hands on the table and took a deep breath. He was only a medic, not a warrior, not a judge. Yet he felt a weight pressing on him. The council had passed its sentence, but something inside him whispered that this was not the end. When he finally lay down to rest, sleep did not come. The image of Rena's eyes haunted him, a silent cry that refused to fade. The dawn would bring her execution, but Markel knew one thing for certain: he could not simply watch. The prison cell was dim and silent, lit only by a faint blue glow from the restraints on Rena's wrists. The walls were smooth crystal, without any cracks or shadows where hope could hide. She sat on the hard bench, her eyes heavy from sleepless hours, her mind replaying the council's words again and again. Dawn would come soon, and with it, her end. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. She lifted her head slowly. The door slid open, and a tall figure entered. It was the human medic, Markel. He carried a small case with medical tools, his uniform neat but plain. The guards remained outside, leaving the two alone. Markel stood silently for a moment, studying her. She expected anger or disgust, but his face showed only calm thought. He placed the case on a small table and began to prepare his instruments. "I am here to check your health," he said quietly. His voice was steady, but not cold. Rena almost laughed, though there was no joy in it. "You wish to know if I am strong enough to die?" Markel paused. The words struck him more deeply than he wanted to admit. He set down his tools and turned toward her. "It is my duty," he said. But then, after a long silence, he added, "It is also my duty to see truth where I can." Her eyes widened slightly. Few had spoken to her like that since the trial began. Most treated her as if she were already gone. "I did not betray them," she whispered. "I never gave maps to raiders. I saved lives at that outpost, but the council does not wish to hear it. They needed someone to blame, and I was the one they chose." Markel sat down across from her, his eyes steady. "If that is true, why would they hide it?" Rena looked down at her hands. "Because the attack was their fault. They ignored warnings, they refused to send reinforcements. If the people knew, trust in the council would break. So instead of admitting failure, they pointed to me." Her voice trembled, but not from fear of death. It was from the weight of carrying the truth with no one to believe her. Markel listened carefully. He thought of the short trial, the missing details, the way the council silenced her every attempt to speak. The pattern fit too well. He remembered history lessons from Earth, times when leaders sacrificed the innocent to protect themselves. "You sound certain," he said softly. "I was there," she answered firmly. "My wounds prove it. The radiation from the raider weapons still lingers in my blood. But they ignored it. To them, the truth was less useful than a lie." Markel leaned back, troubled. As a medic, he knew the truth of wounds and the records of health. If what she said was true, then the medical reports should show it. But during the trial, nothing of that sort was presented. Why? He felt a battle inside himself. One part told him to stay silent, to follow orders, to respect the laws of another people. But another part, the human part that valued fairness and compassion, told him that silence would make him part of their crime. He stood and began to check her pulse, her breathing, her eyes. She allowed it, though she knew it was only a formality. Yet as he worked, he leaned closer and spoke in a low voice. "If you truly are innocent, there must be evidence. Something I can find." Her eyes searched his face, as if trying to see if he was serious. "Why would you risk that? You are human. This is not your fight." Markel closed his case slowly and looked at her. "On my world, I am a healer. I do not fight wars, I do not choose sides. But I know what it means to see someone condemned without justice. If I do nothing, then I am no healer at all. For the first time since her trial, a small spark of hope touched Rena's face. She said nothing, but the silence between them was filled with meaning. The guards returned to escort Markel out. He gave no sign that anything unusual had passed between them. He left the cell with the same calm step he had entered, but inside, his thoughts burned with new determination. That night, Markel returned to the medical archives. His access was limited, but as part of the Allied program, he had permission to review health records. He entered Rena's name and waited as the system displayed her file. What he found made his chest tighten. The record was too clean. It showed minor injuries from training exercises, nothing more. But he remembered what she had said about radiation, about wounds from the battle. Where had those reports gone? Why had they been erased? He searched deeper, bypassing layers of data that ordinary staff would not bother to check. Finally, he uncovered hidden fragments, small, half-deleted notes. Exposure to high radiation. Deep burns treated in field station. Medical signature from a doctor now missing. Markel sat back, staring at the screen. She had been telling the truth. He closed the files quickly, knowing every search might be tracked. His heart beat faster. He had the proof, but it was dangerous. If the council discovered what he had seen, they would silence him too. Yet he knew he could not walk away. Tomorrow, at dawn, she was to be executed. Time was running out. As he left the archives, he looked up at the stars beyond the crystal ceiling. Humans were new to this alliance, often underestimated, seen as weak. But in this moment, Markel realized that courage was not measured in weapons or fleets. Sometimes it was measured in the choice of one person, standing against many. The choice now lay before him. Stay silent and safe, or act and risk everything. And Markel knew, deep inside, that he had already made his choice. White heavy check mark. The night was silent, yet Markel could not find rest. He had uncovered enough in the archives to know that Rena was telling the truth. The missing medical notes, the erased reports, the sudden disappearance of the doctor who had treated her, all of it painted a picture far different from the one the council had shown. But proof in his hands was not the same as justice. He was only a medic, an outsider. To reveal what he knew, he would have to challenge the very leaders of this world. Still, the thought of watching Rena executed weighed heavily on him. He had seen many lives end in his work, but never like this. Never in silence and lies. The next morning, Markel walked through the medical wing with his case in hand, but instead of preparing for patients, he moved quickly to the restricted records room. Only senior healers and council doctors were allowed inside, yet his human status made him less noticeable. Guards often assumed humans did not understand the alien systems deeply enough to be dangerous. Today, that underestimation served him well. Inside, he began a deeper search. He found logs from the fleet's battle with the raiders, reports from soldiers, supply manifests, and fragments of communication records. As he pieced them together, a clearer picture formed. Rena had been at the front lines during the attack on the outpost. She had directed her squad to protect fleeing civilians. Radiation from enemy weapons had injured her badly, and she had collapsed while saving others. The logs even showed that she sent warnings to the council days before the attack, but they had been dismissed. Markel leaned closer to the glowing screen. He found a message stamped with her personal code. It was brief but urgent: enemy raiders sighted near Sector 12. Request immediate reinforcements. The message had been marked as received, but the council never acted. That failure had cost lives. Now he understood why they silenced her. If the truth spread, the people would lose faith in their leaders. Blaming one officer was easier than admitting their own neglect. Markel copied the files onto a small data chip hidden inside his case. His hands shook slightly as he did so. He was not a spy or a warrior, but his actions now carried the weight of both. Later that day, he was escorted again to Rena's cell. The guards unlocked the door, and he stepped inside. She sat in the same corner, her eyes tired but alert. "You return," she said softly. "I had to," Markel replied. He set his case down, pretending to prepare tools. "I found something. Your records were hidden. The radiation wounds, the field reports, even your warnings. They erased it all." For a moment, she stared at him as if unsure whether to believe. Then her shoulders trembled with relief. "You saw it? Then you know I was never a traitor." Markel nodded firmly. "I know. But the council will not listen. They already chose their story." Silence hung between them. The truth was there, but it was not enough to save her, not unless it reached beyond the prison walls. "You could leave it," Rena said quietly. "You are human. No one would blame you if you walked away. You would be safe." Markel looked at her, his expression steady. "On my world, we have a saying, if you see injustice and remain silent, you become part of it. I cannot walk away." Her eyes softened. In that moment, she no longer saw him as just a visitor from another species. She saw him as an ally. The guards called for him to finish, and he returned to his role, checking her pulse and breathing. But as he leaned closer, he whispered, "I have proof. I will not let you face this alone." When he left the cell, the guards noticed nothing. But inside Markel's heart, the weight of his decision grew heavier. He had the evidence, but to use it meant defying the council openly. It meant risking not only his career but perhaps his freedom. That evening, Markel sat in the small quarters given to human staff. He stared at the data chip resting in his hand. The glowing light from the city's crystal towers filtered through his window, painting the room in shades of blue. He knew that at dawn, Rena would be executed in the main square. Hundreds would gather, believing justice was being served. If nothing changed, she would die, and the lie would live on. Markel closed his eyes, remembering the faces of those he had healed in the past: wounded soldiers, frightened children, weary travelers. His duty had always been to preserve life, not to watch it taken unjustly. He thought again of Earth's history, of doctors who had stood against kings, soldiers, and even whole governments to protect the innocent. A plan began to form in his mind, fragile but possible. He could not fight soldiers, but he could spread truth. If the people saw the hidden records, if they understood what had really happened, they might rise against the council's decision. He slipped the data chip into a secure pocket. Tomorrow, before the execution began, he would act. He did not yet know how, but he knew he must. As the city prepared for dawn, Markel prepared for something else, a choice that would change not only his life but perhaps the fate of an entire world. Dawn arrived with a heavy silence across the alien city. The sky above was painted in pale silver, and the crystal towers glowed faintly in the early light. In the central square, preparations for the execution were already underway. Guards in dark armor took their positions, while citizens gathered to watch. The council wanted this to be a lesson, an example of what happened to those who defied them. In her cell, Rena sat with her back straight, her wrists still bound by glowing restraints. She felt the weight of the moment pressing on her. She had expected fear, but what she felt most was a quiet sorrow, not for herself, but for her people, who were being blinded by lies. The door opened, and Markel entered once again with his medical case. The guards allowed him inside, believing he was only here for the final health check. He moved with calm steps, but his heart was pounding. This was the moment he had been preparing for all night. "Are you ready?" he whispered as he knelt beside her. Rena looked at him in confusion. "Ready for what?" Markel's eyes held determination. "For freedom. I will not let them take your life." Her breath caught. For a moment, she thought she had misheard him. But then she saw the resolve in his face. He meant every word. From his case, he pulled out a small device, no larger than his palm. To the guards, it looked like a medical scanner, but it was actually a tool he had altered through the night. He pressed it against the restraints on her wrists, and with a soft pulse of light, the bands released. Rina stared at her freed hands, unable to believe what had just happened. "Why would you do this?" she whispered. "Because the truth must live," Markel answered. "And because no healer should watch an innocent die." Before she could respond, the guards outside the door shifted impatiently. Markel acted quickly. He opened a vial from his case and let out a fine mist into the air. When the guards entered to check on the delay, they inhaled the gas and collapsed silently to the floor, their armor clattering against the crystal tiles. Rina looked at him with wide eyes. "You are a medic, not a fighter." Markel gave a faint smile. "Healing requires many tools. Sometimes, one of those tools is sleep." Together, they stepped into the corridor. The prison was quiet, most of its guards gathered outside for the public event. Markel guided her through narrow service passages he had studied the night before. Each step was filled with tension. At any moment, they could be discovered. As they moved, Rina whispered, "You risk everything. Your alliance, your place among your own people." "Why?" Markel's voice was steady. "Because humans believe in second chances. Because on Earth, we learned long ago that silence in the face of injustice destroys us all. If saving you costs me everything, then so be it." The words struck her deeply. No one from her own council had stood for her. Yet here was a human, a visitor, a stranger risking his life for her truth. They reached a hidden stairway that led down into the tunnels beneath the city. The air grew damp and heavy, the walls rough and unpolished compared to the shining towers above. Here, the glow of the city was gone. Only the faint light of their steps guided them. Suddenly, voices echoed behind them. A patrol had discovered the fallen guards. Alarms rang out across the prison. Red lights flashed, and the sound of pursuit filled the tunnel's run, Markel urged. They sprinted through the winding passages, their footsteps loud against the stone. Rina, though weakened from days of captivity, pushed forward with determination. Markel's knowledge of the map guided them, turning corners just before patrols arrived. Still, the chase grew closer. At one point, a squad appeared ahead, blocking the tunnel. Markel stopped, pulling out another vial from his case. He hurled it against the floor, and a burst of thick smoke filled the air. In the confusion, he and Rina slipped into a side passage, their lungs burning as they forced themselves onward. When they finally emerged into the outer wastelands, the first rays of full dawn spread across the horizon. The city towers shimmered in the distance, alarms still echoing faintly behind them. The open land stretched wide, filled with jagged rocks and dust storms waiting to rise. They paused to catch their breath. Rina turned to him, her voice filled with both awe and disbelief. "You should not have done this. Now they will hunt you too." Markel wiped the dust from his face, his eyes still firm. "Then we will face it together. Your people deserve to know the truth. And we will find a way to show them." For the first time since her arrest, Rina felt hope stir within her. Not because freedom was certain, but because she was no longer alone. Behind them, the city roared with anger, soldiers spreading into the wasteland to find the fugitives. Ahead of them, the land was harsh and unforgiving. But side by side, they moved forward into the unknown, carrying with them a secret powerful enough to shake an empire. The wasteland stretched far and wide, a desert of stone and dust under a pale sky. Jagged cliffs rose like broken teeth, and sharp winds carried sand across the barren ground. For Rina, every step felt heavy. Days of imprisonment had weakened her, yet she forced herself onward. Beside her walked Markel, his steady pace and calm focus guiding them both. Behind them, the faint sound of pursuit never faded. The council's patrols had spread across the land. From time to time, they heard the hum of scout flyers circling overhead, searching for movement among the rocks. Rina stumbled as loose stones shifted beneath her feet. Markel caught her arm before she could fall. "Careful," he said softly. She nodded, breathing hard. "I am slowing you down." "You are still walking," Markel replied. "That is enough." They moved again, weaving between cliffs and ravines. The sun climbed higher, heating the land until the air shimmered. Markel kept his eyes on the horizon, searching for shelter. At last, they found a narrow cave hidden behind a wall of rock. Inside, it was cool and dark, the air still and quiet. Rina sank against the wall, her body trembling with exhaustion. Markel set down his medical case and opened it. He prepared a small nutrient pack, handing it to her. She drank slowly, strength returning to her limbs. "You saved me again," she said quietly. Markel gave a faint smile. "That is what I do." For a moment, silence filled the cave. Outside, the wind howled, carrying faint echoes of soldiers searching. Rina looked at Markel, her eyes filled with questions. "Why risk so much for me? I am not even of your people." Markel met her gaze calmly. "Because truth matters. Because life matters. When I became a healer, I promised to protect those who could not protect themselves. That promise does not end at the borders of species." Her heart stirred at his words. Among her own people, loyalty was measured in duty to the council, obedience to command. Yet here was a human who measured loyalty by compassion, by fairness, by a belief that justice was worth the cost. Later, when night fell, they left the cave and continued their journey under the cover of stars. The ground glittered faintly in the moonlight, and the chill of the air bit at their skin. They spoke little, conserving strength, but their silence was no longer heavy. It was the silence of trust. Still, danger followed. Near midnight, the hum of an engine grew louder. A flyer swept across the sky, its searchlights cutting through the darkness. Markel pulled Rina against the shadow of a cliff, holding her still until the light passed. The flyer hovered, scanning the ground, then moved on. Rina whispered, "They will not stop until we are found." "Then we keep moving," Markel said firmly. "Every step takes us closer to safety." They pressed on until dawn, when exhaustion finally forced them to rest again. As they sat among the rocks, Rina looked toward the distant city. "I once believed in the council," she said softly. "I thought they would always serve the people. But now I see their power is built on fear. They would rather kill one innocent than admit their mistakes." Markel listened quietly. He understood her pain, though her world was not his own. On Earth, history was filled with the same mistakes: leaders who had chosen pride over honesty, power over justice. "You are not alone," he told her. "Many worlds have faced the same. But people can rise. Lies do not last forever." Her eyes softened. "Perhaps you are right. But how can we show the truth when we are hunted?" Markel tapped the pocket where he kept the data chip. "We carry it with us. And we will find a way. If we can reach the outer settlements, we can send the records through their networks. The council cannot silence everyone." Hope flickered in her heart. She looked at him with gratitude. "You are far from your home, yet you fight for mine." "Why?" Markel smiled faintly. "Because that is what it means to be human. We stand when others fall. We speak when others stay silent. We fight not only for ourselves, but for those who need us." The words stayed with her as they rose once more to continue their journey. Step by step, through dust and wind, they pushed forward. Behind them, soldiers searched and flyers circled, but still they moved. As night came again, Rina realized something had changed. She no longer felt only fear. She felt strength not from herself alone, but from the presence of the human beside her. Together, they carried not just survival, but the power of truth. The wastelands were vast, and the hunt was far from over. But in the quiet strength of their bond, Rina sensed a new beginning. For the first time since her arrest, she allowed herself to believe not in the council, not in the system, but in the courage of one human medic who refused to let her stand alone. The wasteland slowly gave way to scattered settlements. Small clusters of homes built from stone and metal stood against the harsh winds, their lights glowing like faint stars in the night. These were frontier communities, far from the crystal towers of the capital. The council often ignored them, but their communication relays reached wide across the planet. Markel and Rina approached one such settlement under cover of darkness. Their clothes were dusty, their faces tired, yet their eyes carried determination. The guards at the gate eyed them with suspicion. Few trusted strangers, especially now that word had spread of a traitor escaping execution. "We are only travelers," Markel said calmly, his hands raised to show he carried no weapon. "We need shelter." The guards hesitated, but one of the older settlers stepped forward. His eyes lingered on Rina's face, recognition flickering there. "She is the one the council named a traitor," he said. Whispers rose among the settlers. Some reached for weapons, others drew back in fear. Rina felt her chest tighten. This was what the council had done to her name, it had turned her people against her. But before the crowd could act, Markel stepped forward. His voice was firm but steady. "Yes, this is Rina. The council called her a traitor, but they lied. I have proof." The settlers froze. Proof was not a word to be taken lightly. Markel pulled the small data chip from his case. Inside this are the records they erased. Her medical scans, her battle reports, her warnings to the council before the attack. She risked her life to save civilians, and the council hid it to cover their failure. The old settler narrowed his eyes. Why would a human speak for her? Markel's gaze did not waver. Because truth matters to us all. Because if you let lies rule, then none of you will ever be safe. The settlers exchanged uncertain glances. At last, the elder nodded. "Come inside." They were led to a small hall where a transmitter hummed faintly. Markel connected the data chip, and glowing symbols filled the screen. The settlers leaned forward as the records played, the radiation wounds marked in Rina's blood, the missing medical notes, the battle reports showing her bravery. Most powerful of all was her urgent warning to the council, ignored until it was too late. When the last record faded, silence hung heavy in the hall. Then voices rose, not in anger at Rina, but at the council. "They lied to us," someone muttered. "They let the colonies fall. They killed our people and blamed her." The anger spread quickly. Settlers began sending the files through their local networks, sharing them with neighboring towns. Within hours, the truth traveled faster than the council could stop it. Rina sat quietly, her eyes wide as she listened. For so long, her voice had been silenced. Now her people were finally hearing her story, not from her lips, but from the proof the council had tried to bury. Markel stood beside her. "It has begun," he said softly. By morning, the capital city stirred with unrest. Citizens gathered in streets, their screens filled with the hidden records. Some shouted in disbelief, others in fury. The council tried to issue statements, calling the files false, the work of enemies. But the people had seen enough. Too many details matched their own memories of the raids. Too many signs of corruption could no longer be denied. Crowds marched through the crystal streets, demanding answers. The council chambers, once filled with authority, now echoed with fear. Leaders who had spoken boldly of justice now hid behind guarded doors. Meanwhile, in the frontier settlement, Rina watched the reports spread across the networks. For the first time since her arrest, she allowed herself to breathe freely. "They know the truth now," she whispered. Markel placed a hand on her shoulder. "Yes. But the council will not fall easily. They will fight to keep their power. She nodded, strength returning to her voice. Then we must be ready. Throughout the day, more settlers came to offer support. Supplies were given, shelter was offered, and voices of loyalty replaced the whispers of doubt. Rina was no longer alone. She was becoming a symbol not of betrayal, but of resistance. At sunset, she stood before the small crowd of settlers. Her voice was clear, steady. I did not seek to be a hero. I am a soldier, nothing more. But I will not let the council's lies destroy us. I will stand, and if you will stand with me, then together we will see truth restored. The people answered with raised voices, their support echoing across the hall. Markel watched her with quiet pride. He had not saved her only to see her live, he had saved her so that her truth could live. As the night deepened, messages poured in from across the planet. Protests in the capital grew stronger, spreading to nearby cities. The council's grip on power was slipping. What had begun with one human's choice now sparked a fire that no wall of crystal could contain. For Rina, hope was no longer a fragile dream. It was alive, carried in the voices of her people. And for Markel, the lesson was clear: humanity's strength was not in weapons or numbers, but in the courage to act when no one else dared. The unrest in the capital city had grown into a storm. Streets once filled with silence now roared with voices demanding truth. Citizens carried lights in their hands, forming rivers of brightness that wound through the towering crystal structures. For the first time in years, the people were united not by fear, but by outrage. The council tried to tighten their grip. Soldiers were ordered to control the crowds, but many refused. Some lowered their weapons, others turned away rather than strike at their own people. The walls of authority were cracking. In a hidden chamber beneath the settlement, Rina and Markel prepared for what they knew would come. Their message had spread beyond the planet. Neighboring colonies had received the truth and were beginning to question the council's rule. It was no longer a single rebellion, it was the spark of something larger. Rina stood before a small map projected in the air. The council has retreated into their stronghold, she said. They will not give up power willingly. If they are cornered, they will lash out. Markel nodded. He had seen such desperation before in human history. Leaders who thrived on lies often made their last stand in defiance, no matter the cost. Then we must be ready to show them another way, he said. A messenger entered the chamber, breathless with urgency. The council is calling for your capture again, he said. They say you are the enemy of order. Rina's eyes hardened. Then let them hear my answer. Moments later, her voice echoed through the networks. Standing tall, she appeared on every screen across the cities and settlements. Her face carried no fear, only determination. I was named a traitor, she began, but the only betrayal was done by those who now hide behind their walls. They feared truth, and so they tried to bury it. But truth has risen, and so have we. I will not run. I will stand for justice, and I ask you all to stand with me. Her words struck deep. In the capital, crowds lifted their voices higher. Soldiers laid down their weapons and joined the marchers. The Crystal City, once a symbol of control, became the heart of a movement. The council, trapped in their chambers, argued fiercely among themselves. Some wanted to flee, others demanded the use of force. But even their guards no longer trusted them. The weight of their lies had crushed the foundation of their rule. As dawn rose, the people gathered outside the council's stronghold. Thousands filled the wide avenues, their chants shaking the air. Rina walked at the front, with Markel at her side. The settlers had given her armor polished with simple symbols of unity, not rank. To the crowd, she was no longer just a soldier, she was the voice of their struggle. When they reached the gates, the council guards stepped aside. Not a single weapon was raised against the people. The council stood alone. Inside the great hall, the council leaders looked down from their high seats. Their voices were sharp, but their power was gone. "You have no right to be here," one of them shouted. Rina stepped forward, her voice steady. "We are here because you lost the right to lead when you chose lies over truth, and power over lives." The hall shook with the sound of the people outside, their chants echoing through the crystal walls. The leaders faltered, their words drowned by the strength of the crowd. Markel moved quietly to the center of the hall, carrying the data case. He placed it on the council's table. "Here is the truth you tried to erase," he said. "The people have seen it, and they will not forget. You cannot hide anymore." The council leaders tried to speak, but the doors opened wide, and the citizens poured in. For the first time, rulers who had judged so many were judged themselves. They were taken into custody, not by force, but by the will of the people. As the council was led away, the chants turned into cheers. Hope filled the air. Rina stood among them, her shoulders heavy with the weight of what had happened. She looked at Markel. "It is over," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "No. It has only begun. Now your people must decide what kind of future they will build." Her eyes softened, but determination remained. "Then I will help them. Not as a leader, but as one voice among many. Together, we will rebuild." The following weeks brought change. New councils were formed, chosen by the people, not by fear. Settlements sent their voices to the capital, and laws were reshaped. The lies of the past were recorded openly, so they could never be forgotten. Through it all, Rina became a symbol of courage, though she never claimed the title. And beside her, Markel remained a reminder that sometimes it only takes one act of humanity to spark the courage of many. On the day the first new council gathered, people from across the colonies stood in the central plaza. Rina and Markel walked among them, unnoticed at first, just two figures in the crowd. But when the cheers rose for freedom, for justice, and for truth, Rina felt a quiet peace in her heart. She looked at Markel and smiled. "You saved me when no one else dared. Not just my life, but the voice of my people." Markel returned the smile, his voice calm and warm. "Sometimes, saving one life means saving many." The sun rose high above the crystal city, its light shining across streets once darkened by fear. And in that light, humanity's strength was clear, not in power, not in weapons, but in the simple courage to do what was right. The story of Rina and the human medic spread far beyond the planet, carried as a tale of hope and defiance. And though their names might fade with time, the lesson remained: truth cannot be silenced, and courage cannot be broken.